I ask these people present to witness that before God, I you
take you to be my wife,
to have and to hold you from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until we are parted by death. Okay, give her the microphone. I ask these people present to witness that before God, I take you
to
be my husband, to have and to hold you from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness, in health, to love, to cherish until we are parted by death.
It's another time for another teaching, and I just thought I would step up out of the normal and do something special. This special teaching on a very important topic, which we all would be concerned about, and this topic is the issue of marriage. And I was privileged just last weekend, after a very long while, to go to a wedding. And actually, because this wedding is quite close to my family, it kind of brought back again the interest in me to talk about issues as relates to marriage and to the home. And so, just briefly, I just want to go through one or two things about marriage. Now, I could actually step out of my comfort zone and talk about marriage from a philosophical perspective, but I believe that doing that is sometimes it is necessary. But at this point, I want to us to first of all look at it from the Christian perspective. And when we understand it from the Christian perspective, then we can now open up and talk about other issues, maybe from the philosophical, so that everybody will be able to understand why and be able to defend what he or she believes. And first of all, we would have to draw a definition of marriage. And it's important to draw a definition of marriage. And when we look at it from the Christian perspective, we find that marriage from the Christian perspective is actually drawn from the Bible. And the Bible, for those of us who don't know what the Bible is, we will discover that the Bible is a document, a very, very old document. And this document is as old as 5,000 years from records, archaeological evidence. Some parts are as old as 5,000 years, some probably realistically about 3,000 years, between that range. And of course, the latest are just about 2,000 plus years. And so this group of documents are what the Christian Church has chosen to accept as the foundation of everything that they do. And of course, this is a cultural document and is also regarded as a spiritual document because it refers to a person called God. Okay, and of course, we really know that the background of the existence of human beings coming to accept that there is a person called God is religion, and religion is one of the earliest forms of culture that human society has known. And before the invention or the creation of science, before the creation of kingdoms, before the creation of most of what we know today, religion was one of the earliest forms of civilization that human beings have ever known. Of course, the Bible does not record for us anything in terms of what scientists might call the Stone Age or the Ice Age. The only thing that we see in the Bible, that is from Genesis chapter 1 right through to Genesis chapter 6, is the existence of human beings in a state where, of course, there was very little technology. And it is possible that these stories, which are most often referred to as mythical stories, are retellings of that period of time, the period where that popularly referred to as the Stone Age, and of course Ice Age, and where the early humans lived. Of course, from the biblical perspective, these humans must have lived not more than 10,000 years from now in the past. Okay, so plus and minus, of course, the verifiable dates are about 4,500, 5,000, but these humans must have lived about 10,000 years ago, and many scientists will also agree with that point of view. And so, when we look at it from Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, we will go ahead now to define what marriage is from this very ancient record of a people that lived somewhere around Mesopotamia in the Middle East. Genesis chapter 2, first of all, we'll be reading verse 24 or 23, and we'll say, "The man said, 'This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man.'" And he continues in verse 24, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother, and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Of course, we know that is consistent with the Stone Age theory. Human beings lived naked. They didn't care for such things except for a few, maybe leaves or skin, animal skin that they covered themselves with. Of course, this is consistent with many retellings of how most human beings were even up to the 19th century. So we find that human beings lived in this state, but one of the earliest traditions that they created was marriage. And this is what the Bible here in Genesis chapter 2 is telling us. Okay? That is the foundation of marriage that Christians, that is the foundation of Christian marriage according to the Bible, according to these documents which have been brought together to form the Bible. And all Christians believe this. And it continues to say, of course, a man leaves, in verse 24, he leaves his father and his mother. So marriage itself is when a man would leave his parents and the woman will do the same, and they will come together and they become one. They set up a new institution.
One, he said, all things he has created is good, but only one thing is so that the man was alone and the man needs a suitable helper. Mace mai dacewa ba mace mai daci ba. Mataimakiya mai dacewa ko? Ba mai daci ba. In the text we have just read from verse 18, we were told that God saw that it was not good for the man to be alone. God saw that a man, if he's alone, it was not going to be good for him. And so God decided to create a perfect helper, suitable one.
Okay, and they become one flesh. And in one flesh, it means something happens. There is procreation, and of course, children are born. That is, the children now actually exemplify that one flesh. Procreation, of course, cannot be done without that oneness. And of course, when children are born, they exemplify this one flesh. And this is just what marriage is. Okay? So there is a living of the parental heritage, and there is a coming together to form a new institution. And in that institution, two people become one. Now, this is very, very interesting, and this is the definition of marriage according to the Bible. Now, there are certain problems that come to bear when you talk about marriage for so many people, especially in the 21st century. There are so many issues that come to bear, and some of these issues we will find even within the pages of the Bible are actually brought to the fore. And issues like marriage within the family. Questions are raised like, who did the children of Adam and Eve marry? Okay, this is not dealt with in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, but it's dealt with somewhere else in Genesis chapter 4, 5, and 6. Okay, when we look at those, we will see how this actually played out. Issues of same-sex marriage and, of course, intercourse with animals, interracial marriages, and so on and so forth. We will have to look at all those things because many people have different views on these things as we speak. And so, first and foremost, we will discover a man named Abraham. Okay, a man named Abraham was said to be called by God in Genesis chapter 12, and uh, he was asked to do certain things, and from him came a great nation, and that nation is the nation that we know as Israel. Um, Something happened, and when we trace the genealogy of Abraham, we will discover that Abraham actually married his half sister. Okay, Abraham married his half sister, and this was normal in those ancient times because God had created them, of course, to be male and female, and of course, we see in Genesis chapter 2, where we just read, that God actually created the woman from the man. That means he removed a rib from the man. He put the man to sleep, removed a rib from the man, and then created a woman from that rib. Now, some of us might think this is far-fetched, but it is not very far-fetched. When a woman is pregnant and she is unable to give birth naturally, what happens? Of course, the doctor may decide to put her to sleep, perform a cesarean section, and take out the baby, of course. So that was not too different from doing that. And Of course, in those days, there was no science. Science was not going on. Apart from the normal observation, we also will read from chapter uh, 2 itself, verse 15, where God put the man in the garden and told him to tend the garden, to name the animals first and foremost, and to tend the garden. And of course, the science began through mere observation. So the science was very rudimentary at that point. It was not really developed as we have it now. But of course, God who created them already knew how he created everything, and of course could perform such an operation like cesarean section. It is possible. There are many ideas. It is possible that God created man with a woman growing within him. Who knows? We do not know. But what this book tells us is that he removed a rib and he created a woman from that rib. And because of that, in the early times, the male were permitted to marry their sisters. It was like that. Of course, that was what was allowed, and there couldn't be any other way of doing that. And of course, you would agree with me that creating a separate woman was easier than a man marrying his sister or marrying his cousin. But of course, that was what happened. Because from that man and that woman, different races came. And so, of course, their physiology was markedly different. And so that intercourse, if there was intercourse between them in terms of marriage, would have been very legitimate. Because, of course, this first human being, namely Adam and Eve herself, were the grandest form, or the primordial, as it were, form of humanity that they could have been. So they, from them, came different forms of humanity. And so marriage was allowed between brother and sister at that stage. But as human beings progressed, as they uh, grew in number, of course, they themselves began to stop that form of culture. In fact, when you study history, you find that marriage within the same family continued up to the 19th century, 18th century, 19th century, where people married their own cousins. So it is not very far-fetched. Uh, but of course, we have come to accept that it is better not done uh, because of certain genetic issues. And all is all about genetics. The wider the genetic spectrum, the better for marriage. And this is all that we see here also very clearly observed in the retelling of these stories in the book of Genesis. So the next issue is same-sex and other forms of marriage. Well, the issue of same-sex marriage and bestialism, as it were, are not mentioned in the Bible. Anybody who tells you that such a thing is mentioned in the Bible, except in the negative, it that person has not read his Bible. It is not mentioned in the Bible that human beings could marry animals or could marry from the same sex, sexual orientation. We only see later on in the New Testament where it is forbidden. And also for the Jews, sorry, not only in the New Testament, but for the Jews, it was clearly forbidden. Such a thing should never happen within them, and it was considered a punishable offense. Of course, I cannot finish with this without you asking me the question, what about human rights? What about, is it a human right? Well, not from the Christian perspective. No pastor can defend this from the Christian perspective. No theologian can defend this from the Christian perspective. And that is where we will have to delve into the philosophy, okay? The philosophy of intercourse itself is very, very, of course, it is a scientific issue, it is a medical issue. And when you look at the way life is structured, from the plant life, from single-celled organisms to the plant life to other multicellular organisms, but you will discover that, of course, there are different levels of complexity. And the more complex the organism becomes, that is where sexual um, procreation becomes more pronounced. There's asexual procreation, but there's sexual procreation. Our sexual procreation deals with male and female. Asexual procreation, of course, you have to study the organism a little deeper before you can really know where the male and the female gametes are. But in sexual procreation, for multicellular organisms, there's a very clear distinction between the male and the female. And of course, we know that human beings are some of the most complex organisms, biological organisms that exist. And because of this, of course, their sexuality is far more complicated. And of course, it is in human beings that you discover anything called morality. And because of that, sex is a moral issue. It is not just solely a biological issue. Even from the biology, there is a clear distinction between male and female. And it's only in very minority cases that that distinction is not made. But if we're not looking at it just based on the biology, we find that in human beings, it is not just biology. There is morality. And it is in human beings that religion was first discovered. And because of that, marriage is a moral institution. It is not just a biological institution, it is a moral institution. For that matter, maybe I'll be able to diversify on this very issue further. But that is the Christian belief on the issue. There is no defense for same-sex marriages in the Bible. No such defense. Then let us proceed to another issue that may be also contentious: interracial marriages. Now, this, of course, is, of course, like the previous one, there is very little discussion about any prohibition of interracial marriages in the Bible. But we find that God was concerned to limit the Israelites from marrying outside their own tribe or culture. And the very reason was because the practices of the other tribes, which were known as the Gentiles, were not in conformity with the laws that he had given to them, to the Israelites. And for that reason, he prohibited the ancient Israelites from marrying at the early onset of the nation. And the reason was very clear. Those people who did not believe in the God of Israel had the propensity of coming into Israel and causing a stir. They wanted to change the laws and the culture of the Israelites. And so they polluted that. And that was why there was a prohibition. But when you go even to the book of Jeremiah, where God himself instructed that King Nebuchadnezzar rule the world, he actually began to loosen those ties. He began to be less affirmative about the Israelites marrying outside. In fact, in Jeremiah chapter 29, he told them, go and marry, settle down. And that is the beginning of liberalizing marriage outside uh, uh, racial and ethnic boundaries. And so there is a defense for interracial marriage in the Bible. There is a defense for intertribal marriage in the Bible. In fact, the whole gospel of Jesus Christ is part of the defense for that. And so interracial, intertribal marriages are sanctioned. But of course, it is an individual thing that if you do not believe that the person you are marrying is totally committed to what you believe in, and you know that that will create a hindrance or a problem within the marriage, of course, you may want to avoid that marriage. So we go on to the next issue. Marriage is the basis of human society, like we tried to show from the beginning of this study. It is the basis of the human society. And of course, animals are not limited to such a thing like marriage. Plants are not limited to such a thing like marriage. A plant contains the male and the female gametes within one body. And of course, in animals, there is the male and female, but there is a very liberal form of existence where there is no real demarcation as to marriage. It changes anytime, seasonally. And so, the basis of human society is marriage. Human beings are able to live within a cultural and a moral setup that defines what marriage is for them. And that is why from the Christian belief system is very strict about marriage and how many partners can partake in a marriage and what actually constitutes a marriage. And of course, we have looked at the definition of marriage, and it is a marriage between a man and a woman, okay, who leave their parents and come and they become one flesh. So you would ask another question as to polygamy. And in this light, we would have to observe that polygamy itself, like marriage from within one family, was a thing that developed out of pure necessity and sometimes just out of a misnomer within society, of course, based on population difference. Certain weak personalities needed help, like the woman was in those days, based on physiology, considered weaker, and so could not defend herself and needed a man to defend her. So more than one woman may marry one man in those days, and this continues up to today. Yet, the biblical or the Christian belief is that it is just between one man and one woman. That is the ideal. Any other form of marriage is not encouraged by the Christian belief system. It was practiced, but practiced based on uh, cultural foundations that were just concerned about security, were just concerned about hierarchy within society. And this will take us to talk about the issue of course, security and hierarchy. How do we now relate the issues of security and hierarchy in modern day society to Christian beliefs? Many marriages are conducted based on the desire to form an economic partnership, uh, which will start from that and then progress to the larger nation. So with more marriages, of course, the nation is more secure, more stable, based on that probably ancient or feudal system. Of course, today we have a more liberal system, and that is why, of course, more people may not want to marry. But in those days, of course, because of that setting, that feudal or ancient setting, there was the priority of marriage, because that marriage ensured economic prosperity, it ensured economic stability at least. And that is how marriage now went outside the biblical provision and now became marriage between families rather than marriage between individuals, which we have very sometimes in certain settings, even in the African setting sometimes. Um, and in that setting, the man is primarily the provider. And the reason is very, very, very simple. The woman is the one who carries the pregnancy, gives birth to the children for 9 months, and she goes through a laborious process for the child is born. Before she weans the child from breast milk, the child might be up to 2 years, or and before the child becomes independent, it might be up to 10 years of age. And because of that, the man, because he doesn't have to carry that burden, is the primary provider. Okay, and of course, like we have said, this does not obtain as strictly as it used to in the 21st century. It does not obtain as strictly as it used to, because of course many people can choose not to marry, and of course men, instead of abusing their power or their freedom, tend to be more considerate of the women, and they tend to also share the burden of raising the child after the child is born, uh, when the child is not breastfeeding and all that. And so, of course, it is more liberal in this time. And in that light, what about hierarchy? It is very misguided to think that because the man is the provider, that is why he is a leader. That because he is the stronger one, most popularly, he's the stronger one, he will be the leader. Those things are just advantages for the role that he is created to accomplish in provision, while the woman is heavy in labor and while she's probably taking care of children. Uh, the leadership role that he has is mostly is where Christianity gets uh, where religion gets to assert itself. Because when you look at it strictly, it's not just about the strength, it's not just about the terms of provision. It is phenomenological, if you want to look at it that way. the basis of every, this is an example, it is not um, uh, it's not one that is very scientific, but it will serve at this point. The basis of life is the cell. If you look at it, inanimate objects have the atom as the basis of most things that exist. And so the Bible kind of makes the man that kind of organism. For human beings, the male is the first that came before the female. And for that reason, of course, the leader, who is the leader? The leader is the person at the front of the queue. And he is the person that directs where the queue is going, as long as he is the person with access to whatever person is providing resource. And so the Bible makes the man that person, that first person. Just like the cell is the unit of any organism. And so the man is that primordial, as it were, and so continues to be that. And that is why, in moral terms, the Bible, and of course Christianity picks from that, pronounces the man as the head. Because there just has to be one. Okay? The rejection of hierarchy is popularly a modern concept. And even though you might find it in the pre-modern sense, is actually a break away from the science. In my view, is a break away from the science, because for order to be in any system, science is all about order. It's all about things developing in a particular way and keeping a very, very structure. You can break the structure, but when you break the structure, it becomes another thing. When one chemical reacts with another chemical, it forms a new chemical, a new substance, and that substance is defined by the different percentages of those chemicals that mix. Okay, so the leader is the more dominant, or the first in line, as it were. And of course, this is the same reason that some people will use and say, okay, if the woman is more economically stable, or she's more assertive, or physically stronger, then she should be the head of the home. But this, in moral terms, it does not follow. You can do that in a chemistry lab, but you cannot do that in a home, because the home is based on concepts that are not really scientifically explainable. And this is what religion is about. And of course, we will still discuss that in another forum. But it is important to delineate between economic rules and hierarchy in the home. And this economy itself within the society, within the family, is a very, very, very massive principle. And some people may even use economy to say that is the reason why the man should suppress the woman. Would you agree with that? Of course, no. So because of that, you will discover that that is not the reason the man is the head of the home. But he is a head because there must be a leader in any setting. Just for the sake of peace, just for the sake of tranquility. And so there is that sense of hierarchy in the home. And that is why the children also must submit to that hierarchy. And we can find that clearly in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33, and 6, verse 1 to 9. You see it very clearly stated. So let's move on. What about singlehood? Can a person stay single? I mean, this is one thing that is very, very clear in the Bible. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1 to 40, you see the Apostle Paul talks extensively about singlehood, and he says, in fact, he recommends singlehood. If you believe that you cannot be submissive to a partner while pursuing certain duties, you should remain single. Jesus Christ himself made reference to that also, because there was a culture that existed in that time where some people were made eunuchs or were eunuchs from birth. And of course, in the sense of people who are, what do you call them now, trans, as it were, you know, he recommends that they stay unmarried, that they should not marry, because they're a little minority and they should focus on spiritual things. And of course, the Apostle Paul talks in his own sense, in the sense of marriage, and says people who are not even trans, normal people, but feeling that because of the difficulties of the time, economic difficulties, social difficulties, they should focus on learning about God and forget about marriage, and it will really enrich their lives more than them going into marriage and not fulfilling themselves or being hindered from being who they want to be, very clearly in that sense of serving God. But of course, in our time, you find that would really apply to those who would not want to go into marriage. And he also says that marriage, a lot of times, is to fulfill sexual desires in a responsible way. And this is what the Apostle Paul says, although he also emphasizes it's not just about sex, but also that the two partners must agree on everything. And in that agreement, they will be able to fulfill their mutual ambitions in life. So finally, before we close this, I want to touch on one topic which is actually an issue that bothers many people, and that in the sense of discipline and violence in the home. I would want to look at it not based on the legalistic sense. Of course, this is one thing that we Christians kind of can get very emotional about, and sometimes we don't apply it very well because it is often looked at in the legalistic sense of somebody already committing acts of violence against another person within the home. And of course, we can talk about child discipline and all that. And in that sense, I want to look at it in the sense of, first of all, what is the source of such an action, whether disciplinarian action or violent action, and then look at it based on what the solution will then be. And when you look at it from that angle, you will discover that the source of that is mainly disagreements, incompatibility. And that will result, when you talk about it in referring to the man and the woman now, we've not tackled one of children yet. It comes from incompatibility and disagreements. And that comes when there is, of course, partners get into marriage without agreement, full agreement as to what the marriage really is all about. And of course, differences of upbringing, differences of culture, differences when mistakes are made. And this can happen lots of times. And of course, it is not good that the thing deteriorates to violence. It is actually an abnormality. And it is an abnormality because one person has so deviated that it becomes an issue of violence. Sometimes it's because of drunkenness, sometimes it's because of drug abuse, sometimes it's because of unfaithfulness, and sometimes, of course, because of disrespect. Sometimes the man is, and when you talk about disrespect, it's not only the woman that disrespects the man. Sometimes the man can disrespect the woman, and the woman can feel offended, and so on and so forth. And there is violence. People have even talked about emotional violence, and this exists. And of course, one has to trace the source. Then one can really talk about it. But when you go from the legalistic perspective, legalism itself can destroy the family, can destroy the home. Applying whatever law is there. Yes, the law has to be applied when there is mortal injury, when there is physical injury. Yes, sometimes it is very, very advisable, most of the time, to apply the law. But when it is not in that sense, you have to go gently and look at the source first. When you look at the source of such violence, then you can attack it with a solution. And that is normally to insist that both parties had come into the relationship with sincere motives, and from there you begin to build on many things. There can be miscommunication, there can be little disagreements here and there, but if there is a good intention in coming into the marriage, you find that disrespect will be avoided, unnecessary disrespect, and unnecessary potentially violent conclusions. And this is the issue. And these are the issues that we must continue to look at. And once there is disrespect in the marriage, you cannot have a common ground. Sometimes it is basically impossible to stop one form of violence or the other. If there is no physical violence, there will be emotional violence because there is disrespect in the marriage. And we must look at this. And from the Christian perspective, of course, that is where there is an insistence that there must be agreement before marriage. The man or woman must not marry if they are unequally yoked, if there is a major disagreement, philosophical, spiritual, moral, cultural disagreement. It is not recommended. When it has already been done without one's knowledge, of course, there are recommended ways to follow to help in that situation, but it is not recommended that that should happen. And so these are some of the things that I want to discuss in this first video about marriage. In subsequent weeks and months, I will continue to talk about this, but for now, this is where we will stop. Links are in the description. Any questions and comments? Thank you.